Well, hi there. Thanks for finding The Profitable Photographer with Lucy Dumas here on YouTube. If you want more, you can just go to any podcast channel and find the show or go to lucydumascoaching.com, Lucy with an I, to learn more about me and to listen to shows. And thank you for subscribing, sharing with your friends, and I hope you enjoy. Bye for now. Color is my day-long obsession, joy, and torment. That's a quote by the famous painter Claude Monet. And another great quote, art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life. That's by Pablo Picasso. And welcome, everybody, back to The Profitable Photographer, or if you're here for the first time. Ooh, I got to take a breath on that. Anyway, if you're here for the first time, I hope you enjoy and I hope you listen to the other 180 plus episodes. Also, you want to check out something new, which is my YouTube channel. I'm now posting these as videos or audio videos if I get too tongue-tied like I just did. So the reason for the quotes today is because we're going to talk about all things copyright as artists and creatives and photographers. One of those issues that there's a lot of misinformation and also situations where my favorite organization, Professional Photographers of America, has done a lot to protect our rights. So please check out the YouTube channel. I love feedback, and as I said, if you listened last week, my love language is words of affirmation. So to keep me going with this mostly a labor of love podcast, please give me some feedback. And even if it's a little, I can take it. All right. I want to welcome our guest, Luc Boulet. Did I pronounce that right, Luc?
Yes.
Yes, because it's French and French Canadian, although he was raised in Georgia in the South. Let me tell you a little about Luc. He's worked in the nonprofit organization management industry, it's a mouthful, and the political sphere with 5 years of experience as a lobbyist on the state and federal levels. More recently, he spent his time in the intellectual property sphere, representing the interests of professional photographers. Luc is currently the government affairs manager for the Professional Photographers of America and represents our interests across the country in state, federal agencies, and on Capitol Hill. So welcome, Luc. Thank you for being on my show, and thank you for everything that you do for us.
Of course, Lucy. Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So that was kind of a mouthful. So can you share what that really means, what your job is and such?
Yeah, of course. So for the past 3 years, I've been the government affairs manager at Professional Photographers of America. And the roles and responsibilities associated with that are advocating for professional photographers on Capitol Hill, on the state level, and with federal agencies. So if there's an issue going on in, say, the national parks, then we would notify the various officials at the national parks to try to rectify whatever issue it is, and then go to the congressional level, whatever oversight that they're able to offer over the federal agency. Then we contact them as well and make sure that federal law is being upheld and constitutional rights are being respected, and in particular, freedom of speech, which is what photography is protected under.
Oh, so where my mind went when you said federal parks was issues around our rights to photograph.
Yeah, absolutely. So your ability to photograph is protected under the same protections as freedom of speech, and there's freedom of the press as well. So that's an entirely separate freedom. But in sort of separate of that, there's also a historical tradition of photography being done in the parks ever since before the parks even existed. So you have a litany of famous photographers who captured the national parks, which nature photography really wasn't. Most people were capturing people. wasn't so much photography about nature, and capturing nature was really what I think drove a lot of people to the national parks, and seeing these magnificent geological features and unique things that our nation has to offer drove a lot of people to the national parks. And then I think, it was a contributing factor to our own president, Teddy Roosevelt, who was very influential on the national parks and their incorporation and bringing more into under that umbrella as areas where the public can go and recreate and photograph without any sort of requirement of fees being paid, as long as the impact that is being exhibited on the park is no different than any other individual who travels in on their own 2 feet or goes to a parking lot and pays the requisite fee for the use.
So how does that work if someone wants to do, let's say, family portraits in a national park? I know there's in Wyoming, is it Wyoming, where the Grand Tetons are?
Yep.
There's a big controversy. One of my coaching clients, that's her main place that she does family portraits. So how does that fit in with the freedom of speech?
Yeah, so absolutely. And that's one of the issues that we, sort of contended with the Grand Teton National Park is we notified them of, existing federal law and where that stands with regards to federal statute that clarified, non-impactful photography shouldn't require a permit. And thus there's also federal statute which is a case I believe it's Price v. Barr, if my memory serves me correctly, where it established that videography can be done in the park without any because someone's making a profit off of the videography, it shouldn't require any sort of royalty to the national parks as long as the videography wasn't impactful. Someone bringing in a camera with their own 2 hands is, no different really than someone walking in on their own 2 feet with, a hiking stick in their hand.
So even if you're posing people in an area where other people are walking and so forth, that is permissible, and they were trying to charge fees for that. Is that?
Yeah, so the national parks were looking to charge a 3% royalty on revenue that was made in the park. And then there was a sliding scale to that. And then there's a number of...
Oh, crap.
Yeah. And this isn't just Grand Teton National Park. There were other national parks that were, doing the same sort of thing. And they were looking at changing the standard for commercial photography, their definition. And they were looking to treat photographers as a commercial vendor who operated in the park. So, for example, like a kayak rental vendor who operated in the national park and they rent out kayaks for individuals. They wanted to treat them in the same category as a photographer who walks into the park. A family, their studio might be on Main Street of Jackson Hole, for example. Tourist comes into their shop, says, "Hey, I would love a headshot for my LinkedIn in Grand Teton." And they say, "Oh, well, that's great. Fantastic." And then you go to the national park. There's no real. They wanted to also treat them as guides too, so they were wanting them to go through a permitting process the same as a hiking guide, and also require CPR certification, a name badge. It's like identifiable clothing as like I'm photographer. Here's my vest, and here's my name badge, and here's my CPR certification, and here's my liability insurance, which clarifies I have coverage inside the national park, by which we haven't come across an insurance agency that could even give a reasonable fee for giving insurance for a photographer over liability in the national park. And there's so many dangerous features in the national park to then put that burden on the straps of a photographer in the same areas that the general public goes. And it's not as if they're going off into the bush and into unaccessible areas of the park, areas where the public doesn't generally gather. They're in the same areas as you would bring a family of 4 or a family of 10. It's not as if they're skirting, admission fees. They're both paying fees. The photographer probably has a national pass to get unlimited visits to the park, and then the patron has to pay their fee. So it's no different as someone walking in and taking a photo with their phone and then a bunch of other photos and then possibly putting it up on their business page or their personal Facebook, in the same way as a photographer with a handheld camera that might be a little larger, which does draw attention, and that's primarily the issue.
Yeah. So besides the inconvenience and the financial burden to photographers, I'm thinking about how then park rangers would become police.
Exactly.
And how terrible that would be too, instead of being a part of preserving and being those guides and everything else that park rangers do, for them to, become these entities that we're hiding from or that are like the enemy instead of our friends. I mean, all around, that's such a terrible idea.
Right. There's a litany of issues, and I could certainly go down the line. But one of the issues, you primarily hit the point on the head, where it makes rangers to be the enforcers of this rather arbitrary system,
right?
And it takes away from the otherwise impactful things that individuals do in the park, which disturbing wildlife, modifying features, removing features, going off trail into areas that are off limits to the general public.
Right. And education.
Right.
So PPA came to the rescue and got that squashed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So what we did is we notified the national park, first of all, of the law, where it currently stands. And then we also contacted Senator Barrasso, who was the ranking member of the Senate committee overseeing the Department of Interior. So it covers. Forgive me, there's a lot of committees on the federal level.
Yeah, we don't need to know all of that. Just
the specific one, but we contacted his office, and he in fact is the senator in Wyoming. So it was his own backyard, and so he was very ready to be involved on this issue. And we sent a letter with 400 businesses, and we coordinated with a local group of photographers who are being affected by this, and we notified them. Here were the small businesses in your state that are all going to be affected by this permitting system. And a lot of the requirements would also create a measurable impact on that foot traffic that happens inevitably with the storefront photography business. With the permit wait times, it was so obtrusive that how would you ever get a permit, on the same day as someone walking into your business?
Right.
And so that was also just another issue, sort of combined in that, regardless of the fees that they're looking to charge, regardless of the percentage. You could separate each of these issues entirely and make your own case for it.
Yeah. So when people say, "Oh, PPA, I didn't get anything out of it," I often tell them, "You have no idea what you've gotten out of PPA, even if you didn't join." So just like when I pay my taxes to the state, I try to remember that goes to roads and schools and things that I benefit from. And when now I'm a lifetime member, but when I paid my PPA dues, I thought about those things behind the scenes that we don't see, that for 150 years, this organization has been enhancing the lives and protecting photographers. So, I'm glad I read my PPA magazine and read that article so that I could ask you more about it today. It was just one of those lucky coincidences. But
thank you.
What I really want to talk about, and thank you for that,
of course,
is the copyright issue. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
so the way that I ended up connecting with Luc is a lot of times at lunchtime, I watch Judge Marilyn Milian on the People's Court. And there was a wedding photographer that was suing a bride, or it might have been a birthday party, but it was an event. And she had sent some sneak peeks, but in her contract, it was spelled out that you are not allowed until you've paid in full to post photographs on any social media or print. It was like line by line, and she had an initial and sign, and the defendant had not paid her balance but posted everywhere. And I was thinking, oh, she's going to win this case. I wonder what the award is going to be. But the case ended with no award because the photographer had not registered. And I think I jumped ahead a little bit. We didn't used to be able to sue in small claims court, and you're going to share more about that. But I was baffled because I thought that in the new laws, we didn't have to do that. So I called up PPA and said, I want to know if I need to tell Judge Milian that she was wrong or understand why she was right. And so Luc and I had a great conversation. So I would love to have you share about copyright issues in the past and then what PPA did for 10 years to change it for us. So, and copyright in general. So our photography, when we take a photograph, is it copyrighted automatically? What do we have to do?
So right now, under copyright, when you snap a photo with your finger, that moment that you capture that image, that fixed expression, a fixed expression in a tangible medium is how the Copyright Office defines photography or copyrighted works. And the moment you capture it, it is your copyright. But in order to access your copyright, it has to be registered. And essentially that is proving the ownership of the work. So if you end up in a situation of a copyright infringement, in order to prove essentially that work is yours and that you have the ownership over the copyright, you have to get the image registered with the Copyright Office. And for many, many years, decades, frankly, there was the issue of essentially being unable to access that right of copyright protection if the damages didn't meet the requisite cost of filing in federal court and pursuing the case to its conclusion.
Okay.
And so what, for the better part of the last decade, PPA has done, our main legislative priority was the passage of the CASE Act. And the CASE Act was the Copyright Alternatives and Small Claims Enforcement Act. And that essentially created a small claims tribunal in the Copyright Office, which set a cap of damages at $30,000 for multiple infringements and $15,000 for one infringement. And then there's also a smaller claims system, which is up to $5,000 for an infringement. So it puts caps on damages to incentivize participation in the small claims process for both parties rather than going through the federal process, which can be expensive, time-consuming, and incredibly complex with the various legal arguments that both sides can use to either attack a copyright's validity. One of the things that they'll go after is the way it was registered or the truth of the registration. They'll go after whether or not it was published, or go after the publication date to invalidate the registration, which does happen from time to time.
Okay. So when we talked, my understanding was, let's take the People's Court case.
Mm-hmm.
She hadn't registered those because back in the day, we were told that we should register every single photograph we ever did, and like every month put that in there, and nobody did that, and nobody now is doing that. So the woman who took the photographs, was my understanding from you, if before she filed the lawsuit, which of course people's court isn't actually, well, anyway, that's another issue, but she filed it as a regular lawsuit and people's court picked it up. Mm-hmm. Then you register before you file the lawsuit. Is that what you're talking about? Because it sounded to me like you said it needed to be registered before the violation. So can I get some clarity?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of a two-part. So you don't necessarily have to register your work prior to the violation, although it does help you considerably to register it prior. And the reason for that is statutory damages in federal court. So right now you have the option of choosing statutory damages or actual damages in a federal proceeding. And statutory damages are defined by statute. It's a penalty, and I want to say it's up to $150,000 per infringement. And then there's the actual damages, which in the higher level infringements, you see the millions of dollars of awards. That's the actual damage. That's the actual damages 9 times out of 10, because what they're measuring is the actual impact of the infringement. So if someone pirates a movie and then they sell $100,000 worth of tickets from that, then the actual damage would be the $100,000 that was caused. And being able to measure that is a somewhat complicated process because it's not necessarily hypothetical. It relies on receipts. But
okay. So let's talk about the smaller, real world for us as photographers.
So in the small claims system under the CASE Act, the CCB, you can file at the same time as registering your image, and you can reach a conclusion in the case. You can do that effectively just as someone else who had registered it prior to the infringement.
Okay. And then I thought you said something about the award needed to be, and maybe that was in the federal courts rather than small claims, that you needed to show how much you were damaged. And I could have that, could be misunderstanding, but in this woman's case, even though, and I'm sure this woman learned a lot now about her business, but the woman only owed her a few $100s. And of course she won her case on that, but not the copyright violation. So am I hearing you right that somewhere between $5,000 and $30,000 could have been awarded if she had done everything right and registered it? Is that, it's not just your direct financial, it's hard to show a financial loss.
Yeah. So outside of the people's court, if she was to file in the CCB, then she would be entitled up to $30,000 for multiple infringements. So if there were, 2 brochures made, for example, from this infringement, then those would be 2 infringements.
Okay. So probably more applicable to a lot of my listeners is, let's say, a wedding venue, and the bride received all the photographs and allowed the venue to use them for advertising without the photographer's permission. Then that is a case where she could negotiate and make get a good relationship and referrals from that vendor. But outside of that, she could take it to small claims court, register the images, then take it to small claims court, and depending on what the vendor did with the images, the up to $30,000 could be received from the wedding venue. Am I on track with that?
Perfectly clear. Yep. there's certainly a process to the CCB, but yeah, you articulated it perfectly.
What's CCB again?
So Copyright Claims Board.
Okay. With your background of, you're in Atlanta, right? At PPA headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
You're in that corporate world. So those letters and things are maybe more natural for you. So anyway.
Sorry. Yeah. Please ask me to clarify any acronyms I throw out there.
Yes.
Yeah. So the CCB is the Copyright Claims Board, which is made up of 3 judges, and those are copyright experts who've been either general counsels or in the copyright field as copyright registrars or somehow affiliated, but they're experts in copyright litigation and copyright infringement. So the benefit to that is that instead of going to a federal judge who deals with many other different kinds of cases, financial crimes, other federal crimes, which are gruesome, you're at a much better in a much better position, I think, because you're articulating this in front of 3 people who deal with copyright all day, and they've been doing it for decades, versus a federal judge who deals with a bunch of other issues other than copyright. And you see this all the time where federal judges get copyright cases wrong, mm-hmm. where they'll be appealed and then it'll go the other way, and then it'll be appealed again, and it might go the other way, and then it'll be appealed, and then it might turn into a Supreme Court case. But there are many cases where federal judges do get copyright issues wrong because there's such a variance of legal arguments that defendants can make, which can sort of thread the needle of fair use.
Okay, I'm confused now because mm-hmm. I thought we were saying so that I could sue somebody locally and just go in front of local judges for a copyright violation in small claims court. But now it's sounding like the CCB is where you file, but it's still small claims court. It
is, right. So all copyright has to be heard either in federal court or now in the small claims system. The People's Court kind of gave it, a somewhat inaccurate representation of how a copyright case would be pursued.
Sure.
It kind of was a mix of a contractual dispute, because it said in the contract, I promise not to essentially infringe on this. So it was in a way a copyright case, but it wasn't necessarily. So
let's take, I did a wedding. My bride got the files. She shared them with a wedding venue, and they're using them in their advertisement. So what do I do then? Where do I go?
So a wedding infringes on your work just off the bat with whatever infringement. I certainly wouldn't discount talking to an intellectual property attorney just off the bat. And because there is a lot that can be done in discovery, which an attorney can help with in obtaining financial records or other significant pieces of evidence that can contribute to the decision of federal court or small claims court. Because you don't want to go to small claims court and then figure out, you could have accessed $120,000 worth of infringements if you had only gone through the federal court process, or a significant higher damages. But if a local venue, a smaller case of infringement, if it's going to be smaller, less than $30,000, if the images aren't registered, it's going to be in your best interest to register those as soon as possible. All of the images that were infringed on, it's going to be in your best interest.
Okay. Then do I file in small claims court, or have to go to that CCD?
So the CCB, it would be in the CCB. You don't need an attorney for the CCB, for the small claims court CCB copyright system. You can do it all pro se on your own. and we actually have a guide on PPA's website for it describes the Copyright Claims Board, and we have a FAQs for that, and then we also provide links to all the various ways of either proceeding in the court that are on the Copyright Office's website, and that shows the process for how to complete that to fruition.
Okay.
But
so this is different than just my local small claims court.
Yeah, so it does happen from time to time that small claims courts do hear cases of copyright related issues, but in essence, they're only going after the contractual dispute, which is you violated this line, which said I wouldn't violate your copyright. But if it's sort of attached to that, then you have to prove, then a small claims court judge who has probably a somewhat foggy relationship with copyright just off the bat. It's not something they deal with every day.
Okay.
Then they're going to not necessarily know that the copyright in question isn't yours or is yours.
Mm-hmm.
And so they want that proof of ownership. If you're able to prove the ownership, then some small claims courts might entertain a copyright related issue with a contractual dispute. You don't necessarily know until you get there, but a small claims court, they're not going to get into 99 times out of 100. They're not going to go into the copyright related violations of, okay, well, it was on how many brochures, and then that amounted to this amount of money that can be collected on copyright. It would just be related to the contractual violation. So sometimes they do get solved and some damages are awarded. I have anecdotally heard of that happening, but as far as a singular just copyright violation, you're not going to be able to effectively, get a conclusion with those at your local, court or county court.
So then we would contact PPA and say, this happened, where do I go? And you guide us to the CCB with some checklists. How do we know what to do?
Yeah, so we have all the resources on our website right now. We have a Copyright Claims Board white paper, which goes into depth on everything that I'm describing and in greater detail. In the FAQs, it also gives a very high level understanding of the CCB, and then the white paper goes into a little bit more depth, and then it also links back to all of the Copyright Office's website, which is very verbose and kind of long, which is why we created our own materials for an easier just understanding of the CCB. But if you do encounter a situation of a copyright infringement, then I would certainly encourage you to take a look at the resources we have on our website, which are also the Copyright Infringement Assistance Tool, which you answer a few questions, and then it provides you with the list of resources that we have, which include a cease and desist notice, a DMCA takedown notice, which is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act notice, and that was created so you can notify a internet service provider host that they're hosting infringed content. I'm sure some people have dealings with that when you see a YouTube video and it says this video has been removed because of the copyright owner.
Right.
So that's the DMCA right there. So that's another way to get copyright content down.
What does DMCA stand for again?
Digital Millennium Copyright Act.
I also know from experience that when we have challenges, if PPA, I'm not sure if it's you or someone else, when we're a member, we can make a phone call and even get some guidance on the first steps. I had a situation where someone took the copy that I'd spent 4 months perfecting for my website update, changed a few words, And sadly, this was someone I thought was a friend that just lives 2 miles from me. And she insisted it was different and she had a right. And so and this goes back several years, but I contracted PPA and he took a look at it and said, it's clearly derivative. And derivative means that it is a violation of my copyright, as like words are copyrighted too, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, not
Yep.
just like the, but that,
Right. Yeah.
and it helped me at least be able to say to her, so and so at PPA looked at it and said clearly it's derivative. And I at one point, because she never took it down, I just decided to sort of gift it to her and rewrite mine, because some things are not worth the inks. But it was so nice to have somebody to talk to and say, am I crazy? Is this okay?
And I'm happy to have those conversations. And any question related to the materials that we provide, or what steps need to be taken to go forward with the situation.
Yeah.
I just want to preface, I can't provide any sort of legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, but I do deal with this on a very regular basis. So I'm happy to answer questions related to any of these copyright issues.
Even just to be able to say, I contacted Professional Photographers of America, and their suggestion was, fill in the blank, or, just to give us that support in ways to think about, preferably negotiating with the made up wedding venue, for example.
Definitely, because it's far easier to rectify those issues and, perhaps create a better relationship because of a sour situation. And it could be advantageous for the both of you. And I'm not necessarily saying you should ignore copyright infringement, but there's a bit of strategy to it that can make an otherwise bad situation better.
Right. And it could be a way to make a great connection with a vendor who really didn't understand. I think most people don't understand that what they're doing is not okay when they violate copyrights. So, okay, is there anything else? Well, I've got you. So just to reiterate, it took PPA 10 years. How many hours do you think, if you could just make a wild guess, did PPA devote? And how many times did your team go to Washington? Like, what was that like to be literally fighting, not physically, but fighting to make it easier for individuals to have success and have the right to take somebody to court?
Well, I would say it was, if you measure it across just a per person hour basis, it was certainly in the millions of hours of the letter writing campaign. All of the members who wrote letters to their representatives and senators, we wrote hundreds of thousands of letters, or we collectively, myself, every member and non-member who wrote a letter to the Copyright Office. That represented out hundreds of thousands of hours, not just on an individual basis. But David Trust, who's the CEO of PPA, he worked on this issue, for over a decade of, himself individually on Capitol Hill, trying to get this issue rectified. And finally, more people started to catch on and carried the message. And then finally it got to, a coalition of people that were vying for this to be fixed.
Yeah. In that coalition, because what I remember is that you got some senators, Congress people on board, like you're working with.
We had I want to say 20 Senate sponsors, which is the fifth of the Senate.
Wow.
And then we had I don't know how many co-sponsors in the House, but the vote was 410-6 in favor of the Case Act.
Wow.
Which is just unheard of, because most votes like that just go by voice vote. If the rest of the members know that it's going to pass, they just will just let it pass. But they wanted to do a voice vote, and so they actually got a tally of everyone who wanted to say no, and there were only 6 of them.
Wow.
And we really don't think it was anything that was a fundamental disagreement of the bill, but we think it was just a general disagreement of perhaps legislation. Maybe they thought there was going to be some expenditure of the federal government, but we really haven't seen that at all, because if anything, the small claims court is going to increase registrations for photography, because now people have an option to go through a system which doesn't cost nearly as much as federal court, and it's
Wow.
$40 for the initial filing fee, and then to the total filing fee is an additional $60, so it's $100 for the entire case. So it's not big money we're talking about here. I mean, it is like $100 is nothing to scoff at, but in order to access your rights, then it's the Copyright Office has to charge something in order to,
right, because you got to run the office and
right,
have people put a little bit of their own skin in the game to not just be frivolously, suing everybody.
Right, and non-frivolous cases as well.
Right.
In their mind, cases that have merit.
Right. Oh, Luke, this was very interesting, and you definitely got that. Now, what's your background? What's your schooling? You're very good at explaining detail. So did you go to law school? Was it like, what is your
No
education background, or just your background?
Yes. So I didn't go to law school. I graduated with a political science degree from University of Georgia in 2017. After that, I went to work for a contract lobbying firm on the state level, just down the street in Capitol Hill, Georgia Capitol Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I really got my feet wet and started reading bills, and was a junior lobbyist working at a firm for multiple clients. And it was almost like death by fire hose of just legislation.
Yeah.
I mean, every day I was reading bills, and immediately coming out of college and doing that was just, I felt like I was where the sausage was being made. And so that just really kickstarted my drive and vigor for advocating for people, and trying to effectuate positive change through the wheels of government. So I worked there for 2 years, and then, before that, I was a photographer and videographer for the Georgia Bulldogs football team. So I did coaches film for Kirby Smart and Mark Richt for 2 years each.
You have a heart for our industry.
Oh, I certainly do. And I still do photography to this day. I'm not a professional photographer by any measure, but I still do it, for a hobby and just personal gratification, really. But I do have that, I would say, photographer mindset. I think that helps me every day when I'm advocating for photographer related issues. And it's such a rewarding experience to be able to help this industry after working in it. While as a student, not certainly a small business owner, but still the passion for the arts has really never left me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because one person can make a difference, especially when then you're surrounded by other people who have similar passions and commitment, and you work together to team. But, I get that your background, your experience, your drive to support us has made a big difference. And I know that people listening to this episode are greatly expanded. So,
thanks.
Now, just really quick, this is primarily in the United States, correct? So if someone in Canada or Australia or Guatemala violates our copyrights, do we have any standing in
Correct.
just the U.S.?
Yeah, currently there's no mechanism right now for that unless the country in question recognizes United States copyright by treaty. And there are ways to get your copyright registered in other countries, of course, but by default, it is increasingly difficult to get copyright matters solved across countries because most countries take their own laws. I mean, because the violation does happen in that other country. Now, if they were to violate it and somehow be related to a U.S.-based entity, then you could pursue that. But if the infringement only happens on overseas or outside of the country, then it is increasingly difficult to get copyright matters litigated.
Yeah, which is now that it's like one world. I imagine in the future, at some point, maybe there'll be ways to work on it. Particularly, and this is about trademark violation, is I've trademarked profitable photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tried to get that with, I don't know if it was Instagram or YouTube or something, when I searched, I found some people who use the same trademarked name, the profitable photographer or profitable photographer, but they're in Australia. And so it's too bad, so sad, even though in our industry, their target person that would be searching for that is the same as mine because, we don't have boundaries with what we're doing. Interesting times.
Definitely. And I do think that there's going to be, a path moving forward for world copyright and world trademark. And currently there is world trademark, but it is not as easy as it is on the federal level to get, that registered as a trademark.
And I'm not Coca-Cola. I'm not, going to lose billions of dollars because somebody else shows up in a search under the profitable photographer and, whatever. But it just, and when I found it in the US where someone just didn't know that this was trademarked and I've said, hey, can you change yours? They've always been like, oh, sure, no problem. Okay. Do you have any last thing that when we hang up, you'd be like, oh man, I wish I'd shared this one thing, or just a parting thought?
Yeah. So I would just say the most important thing I think photographers can do right now is register your work. And it doesn't have to be register every work. But if you do have a public facing image and it's out there, sort of in the ether, and you sell it to other companies and you market it heavily, then I would certainly encourage you to register that work. That way you can collect those statutory damages if you do have to go to federal court and be able to collect a higher amount of damages potentially if it does get infringed on a very regular basis.
So this image back here, the family portrait, see most of it, that was a loan collection, and I've had people over the years ask if they can use it for their brochures and things. So I'm guessing that would be one that I'd want to register because it is one of my iconic images that I'm known for, and that clearly there's been an interest. There was one that asked permission. I sent them a bill. They never